Have you ever wondered why sometimes, when you feel your weakest, you find an unexpected strength? It seems paradoxical, doesn't it? That strength could emerge from weakness, that when we feel most vulnerable, most shattered, it is then that we may uncover an extraordinary power within us. But this isn't a contradiction. It's a profound truth that we often overlook in our quest for strength and resilience. In the hustle of everyday life, we often equate strength with invulnerability, with an ability to withstand all that life throws at us without faltering. But is that truly strength? Or is it just a facade we put on to shield our vulnerabilities? The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." But what if we took it a step further? What if it's not just about surviving hardship, but about embracing our weakness, about acknowledging our fragility? Imagine a world where we don't shun our weaknesses, but instead, we recognize them as a part of who we are. We don't hide them, we don't fight them, but we accept them. We understand that it's okay to be weak, it's okay to feel vulnerable, because it's in those moments of vulnerability that we find our true strength. This strength, however, is not of our own making. It's not a result of our efforts or our resilience. It is a divine strength, a strength that comes from a source greater than ourselves. It is a strength that is born out of weakness, a strength that is made perfect in our imperfections. So the next time you find yourself in a moment of weakness, remember this paradox. Embrace your vulnerability, for it is in your weakness that you will find your true strength. So how can we harness this divine strength? How can we find strength in our weakness? The answer lies in a simple yet profound truth, a truth that has been with us for thousands of years, but is often overlooked in the chaos of modern life. This power is not of our own making, but a divine strength that comes from a source greater than ourselves. Consider the Bible verse, 2 Corinthians 12:9. This verse speaks directly to us, saying, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." Let's take a moment to soak in these powerful words. Let's break it down to understand its profound meaning. The first part of the verse is a reminder. It's a gentle voice saying, "My grace is sufficient for you." Grace, in simple terms, is unmerited favor. It's a gift from God that we don't earn or deserve, and it's always enough. It's abundant, overflowing, and ever-present. When we're feeling drained, exhausted, or at the end of our rope, this grace is still there, filling us up, giving us the strength to carry on. The next part of the verse says, "For my power is made perfect in weakness." Here, it's important to realize that the power referred to is not our own, but God's. And it's in our moments of weakness, when we feel most vulnerable and incapable, that this divine power shines brightest. It's like a lighthouse piercing through the fog, guiding us, lifting us, and empowering us to overcome whatever we're facing. Finally, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. This is an invitation to embrace our weaknesses, to celebrate them even. Not because they're wonderful in themselves, but because they're opportunities for God's strength to manifest in us. They're the spaces where we can feel God's grace the most. So in essence, this verse is a beautiful reassurance. It's a reminder that we're never alone in our struggles, that God's grace is always sufficient, always ready to strengthen us, and that in acknowledging our weaknesses, we allow the power of Christ to rest on us. So how does this verse relate to our everyday life? Think about those times when life dealt you a heavy blow and you felt weak, powerless. Maybe it was a health crisis that left you bedridden for weeks, or perhaps it was a personal struggle, something from your past that haunts you till today. These are the moments we're talking about. In such times, it's easy to feel like a ship adrift in a storm, tossed about by forces beyond your control. You may feel weak, vulnerable, but it's in these moments of vulnerability that the verse from 2 Corinthians 12:9 becomes most relevant. It echoes the comforting words, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Imagine for a moment, you're in the midst of one of these struggles. You're feeling weak, perhaps even helpless. But then you remember this verse. You remember that God's grace is sufficient for you. You remember that even in your weakness, God's power is made perfect. Suddenly, the weight of your struggles seems a little less daunting. This verse isn't just a string of words, it's a lifeline, a beacon of hope in the midst of your storm. It's a reassurance that no matter how weak you may feel, God's grace is there to empower you, to give you the strength to endure and overcome. And it's not just about enduring. This verse also reminds us that it's in our moments of weakness that we can truly experience God's power. It's in those moments when we feel the most vulnerable that we can witness the divine strength of God. So the next time you're feeling weak or powerless, remember this verse, reflect on it, draw strength from it. Use it as a reminder that even in your weakest moments, God's grace is there to empower you. Remember, it's in our perceived weaknesses that we can truly experience the divine strength of God. What would happen if we began to view our weaknesses not as limitations, but as pathways to discovering divine strength? Imagine a world where we don't shy away from our weaknesses. We don't hide them away, hoping no one will notice, but we bring them out into the light, acknowledging their presence. This may seem counterintuitive. After all, aren't we supposed to highlight our strengths, not our weaknesses? But let's take a moment to reconsider. Our weaknesses are not mere flaws to be erased or ignored. They're part of who we are, integral to our human experience. They shape us, mold us, and yes, sometimes they break us. But here's the beautiful part. They can also make us. When we embrace our weaknesses, we open ourselves to growth, to learning, to transformation. We allow ourselves to be vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, we find strength. We find resilience. We find grace. But how does this work, you might ask? How can embracing our weaknesses lead to strength? Consider a tree. When a storm comes, it doesn't stand rigid, unyielding against the wind. No, it bends, it sways, it allows itself to be moved. And in doing so, it survives, it endures, it grows stronger. The same principle applies to us. When we acknowledge our weaknesses, when we allow ourselves to bend and sway, we learn to adapt. We learn to endure. We learn to thrive. This is not a call to wallow in self-pity or to use our weaknesses as an excuse for complacency. Rather, it's an invitation to own our weaknesses, to learn from them, to grow through them. In doing so, we open ourselves up to divine intervention, to God's grace. For it is in our weaknesses that His strength is made perfect. It is in our struggles that His power is revealed. In embracing our weaknesses, we allow space for God's strength to manifest in our lives. So, dare to be vulnerable, dare to be weak, for in your weakness, you will find your strength. So, what's the takeaway from our reflection today? Well, we've delved deep into the paradox of strength and weakness, journeying together through the profound words of 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. My grace is sufficient for you, the verse reassures us, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This scripture is not just a message of hope, but also a beacon guiding us on our spiritual journey. It's a reminder that even when we feel weak, we are never alone. Our weakness, as we've discovered, isn't a symbol of defeat or a sign of inadequacy. Rather, it's an opportunity, an invitation to lean into God's grace, to trust in His strength that's made perfect in our weakness. It's a call to surrender our struggles, our fears, our doubts, and let God's power rest upon us. We've also explored how this verse translates into our everyday life. In a world riddled with challenges, economic instability, health crises, personal struggles, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, to feel weak. But remember, that's precisely when God's power shines the brightest, when His grace becomes our lifeline. Embracing our weaknesses doesn't mean giving in to them. It means acknowledging them, confronting them, and then letting God transform them into strengths. It's about boasting in our weaknesses, not out of pride, but out of humility. Because it's in our humility that we allow Christ's power to rest on us. If you this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and join us tomorrow as we continue to spend 10 minutes with God. And now, as we draw this reflection to a close, let's carry this message in our hearts. Let's remember that in our weakest moments, God's grace is always sufficient. Let's strive to turn our weaknesses into strengths, to let God's grace empower us to endure, to overcome, to triumph. Never forget that in your weakest moments, God's grace is sufficient for you. Before we wrap up today's session, we have a small request. See those icons on the screen? They're not just there for decoration. They're an invitation for you to join our growing community. By hitting the like button, you're telling us that our content resonates with you. By sharing this video, you're helping us reach more people who might benefit from spending 10 minutes with God. And by subscribing, you're ensuring that you don't miss out on any of our future videos. You'll get daily reminders to pause, reflect, and connect with your faith. Plus, you'll be the first to know when we upload new reflections. So if you found today's video helpful, we urge you to share it with your friends and loved ones. After all, what's more fulfilling than sharing a message of hope and strength? Thank you for your support. We look forward to seeing you in our next video, continuing this journey together.